Okay, well, I suppose I know for a fact that my association with Park Lane dates from, or personal association I can recall, dates from 1949, joining the Sunday school in Mrs. Farrow's department. I suppose with the benefit of hindsight, probably one feels fairly nostalgic about it, but at the time I was particularly bothered by the Sunday school anniversaries, which I personally found absolutely agonising. And I have one particularly vivid recollection of one in which the theme, and I think it must have been one of Mrs. Farrow's homegrown productions, was around the garden. And a number of the children appeared as flowers and other creatures of the garden, and I appeared, much to my family's amusement, as a little bee. I think that they possibly felt that there was a certain amount of irony in that. Of course, during my time in the Sunday school, the coal cart era had ended, although I never went myself. I understand that the very small children continued to go to Thickthorn Hall. My memory is of trips to either Galston or Cromer, usually in one of two hired double-decker buses, and then if the weather was fine, we used to indulge ourselves in squirting all the Sunday school teachers with water pistol. But I kept coming on Sunday afternoons, as it then was, for Sunday school, with my little hexagonal threepenny piece, not at that stage an attender of church itself, but I eventually came under the influence of a number of teachers. Those that come to mind immediately are people like Ron Daniels and then later on Leslie Dye, and came into membership of the church. People, of course, that I remember from that period are people like Wilfred Cross and Tim Coleman. And then through the youth group, graduating into a kind of assistant leader status in the combined youth group and youth fellowship, as it was in those days, with Eric Buxton being another one of the leaders at the time, until gradually I assumed the mantle of being the youth club and youth fellowship leader. All this happening really, mostly during the 1960s, which is a particularly vivid time in my recollection. We refer to that period as the swinging 60s, and I think it's fairly true to say that the youth work at St. Peter's at that time really did go with a swing. Something that we shall always be associated with, or what will always be associated with that period, I suppose, are the youth club shows that we used to stage every spring, with the object, theoretically, of raising some money for some worthwhile cause, but really it was an excuse to let our hair down. We always got those particular productions back to front according to normal theatrical traditions. We started by writing the programme, which was intended to be a piece of entertainment in itself. It was certainly an excuse to have quite a lively evening, going absolutely mad and zany and conjuring up all sorts of wild jokes. We used to put all sorts of mock advertisements in the back, some of them mentioning prominent members of the church. And then having got that as something to sell to people, we then of course were faced with a fairly secondary consideration, and I suppose we better have something to show on the night. And because the result was that what actually appeared on the stage very often bore no resemblance to what was in the programme, but it didn't really matter greatly. Sometimes these programmes included references to fictitious members of the cast, and there was one of the early ones in which there were three quite legitimate names. That's Wilfred Cross, Tony Drinkwater, Dave Hendry, followed by a fictitious character called Joe Kzunski, who was accredited as playing music on a galvanised bucket. I remember that the minister at the time, Reg Hopper, came to me very anxious to know who this person was, because he was concerned that somebody in the youth group had escaped his pastoral attention. And he's somewhat embarrassed when I had to explain to him that no such person actually existed. I suppose we were very much influenced by the media of the time and the boom in satire that occurred in the 60s. with David Frost and the That Was the Week That Was team. Then we later on actually moved into film, although this isn't quite as widely known. I don't think we ever managed to capture such a wide audience on film. In fact, some of the gems that we endeavoured to create were never properly finished, but there are still plans, I believe, in dark rooms in the backs of people's houses to complete these projects. I suspect that some of the people who appear in them will have altered somewhat over the ensuing 20 to 25 years. As people's memories of that 60s period are so fond or were so fond and active that there were various, I think, efforts made to revive the tradition of the Spring Review at various times. This occurred certainly in 1982, when this particular production, fundraising, was put on. By that time, quite a number of the youth club members had grown up in years, although if I look at the programme, I wonder just how far they really had progressed from their zany youth when we actually look at what was written in the programme. And then, of course, the spirit of those days was to some extent awakened when we gave Peter Lemon his send-off, and we actually had an evening of entertainment when we really did progress, or revert to that brand of humour. There was a more serious side to our activities in the 60s. This coincided with the period when I was a trainee and then on trial, I should say, and then subsequently an accredited local preacher. And we did form a preaching team and visited various of the churches in the circuit, mostly in the country. As a part of that, we also had a small musical ensemble who went by the singularly appropriate name of the Sugar Beat. As I recall, that was Andrew Wright and John Wright, no connection, of course, Terry Reimer, and Jill and Adrian Cranefield. And I can remember, or I can visualise now, seeing them at the front of various chapels, some of them managing to perfect a suitable smile, and others with this look of extreme intensity on their faces. I think that they probably would have made reasonably good recording, but not necessarily very good television. During the 50 years, there have been two exchanges of ministers and their families with the USA. The first in the late 1960s with when the Michaels came to us from Virginia, and the Hoppers went to live and work with their community. And then again, during Peter Lemon's period of office, he went to near San Francisco, and another family came to us, the Currants. So the Currants were exchanged for the Lemons, a very fruitful transaction, as you might say.